We once believed we understood everything about Steffi Graf's legend, from her remarkable achievements on the tennis court to her seemingly perfect marriage to Andre Agassi. But it turns out that what the public saw was only half the truth. In another aspect of her life, she maintained an entirely separate identity for 3 decades, a dramatic parallel existence that she successfully concealed from the scrutiny of the media. This is not merely the story of a great athlete, but a startling revelation about the difficult choices required to protect one's true self. In the world of professional tennis, Steffi Graf's name has always been associated with terms such as legend, winning machine, and symbol of perfection. Millions of fans watched her lift prestigious trophies and witnessed her absolute dominance on clay courts, grass courts, and hard courts alike. Yet behind the dazzling spotlight and endless applause, there was another life. A parallel life that existed in silence, suppressed for more than 30 years without anyone truly reaching it. It was the world of a woman who grew up under enormous expectations, where each passing day was measured not by personal happiness, but by scores and titles. Steffi was forced to live in 2 separate realities. On one side stood the image of a flawless, resilient, and unbeatable athlete before the public. On the other was a soul that had been deprived since childhood of the right to be vulnerable, the right to stop, and most importantly, the right to be herself. The suppression she experienced from childhood created an invisible wall. Steffi had to learn how to win major matches before she even understood what it meant to define herself. She gradually came to see silence as a protective shield, a necessary survival mechanism used to conceal questions about her identity and her longing for freedom, questions she never dared to voice. When we look at Steffi Graf's record of achievements, we see not only numbers, but an entire era of tennis that she conquered. Throughout her illustrious career, Steffi established milestones that even today, many players still regard as the very limits of perfection. Steffi Graf's life did not begin with youthful dreams or first romantic feelings. It was shaped relentlessly by the hand of her father, Peter Graf. He did not see in his daughter a child who needed affection and care. He saw an athlete who had to be molded according to the most perfect standards. To him, every drop of Steffi's sweat was an investment, and every victory was a validation of his control. His expectations were so overwhelming that they became an atmosphere hanging over every moment of their household. Steffi's mornings never began with laughter or the peace of family life. Instead, they began with grueling drills repeated until exhaustion, where physical fatigue was never allowed a voice. In Peter Graf's world, a child's emotions were considered a worthless luxury, even an obstacle to success. He taught her that only the final result on the scoreboard mattered as a measure of existence and recognition, turning her into an athlete programmed to operate along a predetermined path. The world of the young girl gradually narrowed to the white lines of the tennis court. Ordinary social connections such as friendships, parties, and carefree childhood memories slowly disappeared, replaced by intercontinental tournaments and the coldness of unfamiliar hotel rooms. She was forced to grow up far too quickly in a calculating adult world where personal freedom became a luxury she was never permitted to touch. It was a life programmed for victory, yet emotionally empty. That control was not merely technical pressure, but a possession of the soul itself. Every decision and every step Steffi took was subject to her father's close supervision. She became a symbol of discipline admired by the world. But few realized that behind that professionalism was a child struggling to live someone else's life. Every stroke of her racket was not only an effort to reach greatness, but also a response to her father's endless expectations. Expectations that unintentionally deprived her of the opportunity to live a normal life. Under immense pressure and strict supervision from her father, tennis was no longer simply a sport or a voluntary passion for Steffi Graf. It gradually became a supreme obligation that she was compelled to fulfill so as not to disappoint the expectations others had placed upon her. Every match was not a stage on which to express her identity, but a test of survival where she had to suppress her personal desires in order to remain a perfect, winning machine in the eyes of the world. Refusing or showing signs of fatigue was never an option, because she understood that if she stopped, the entire system of belief her family had built would collapse instantly. To survive in such a demanding environment, Steffi gradually developed a detached way of living in which silence became both her weapon and her safest shield. She learned to adapt to the cold atmosphere of major tournaments, learned to swallow her private thoughts, and continued moving forward even as cracks began to appear within her spirit. That silence was not weakness. It was her way of protecting herself from a world that constantly demanded perfection. She built an invisible wall that separated her true self from the glamorous world around her. Over time, maintaining that protective shell caused Steffi to lose touch with her own emotions. Feelings such as sadness, anger, and doubt were deliberately pushed aside to make room for complete professional focus. Whenever she felt the need to stop, to find a moment of quiet in which to understand herself, the pressures of reality immediately pulled her back to her racket and its endless demands. Her life at that stage resembled a rushing river in which she could only drift along the current of expectation while her personal dreams slowly sank beneath the surface. That silence endured for decades and became such a habit that even she sometimes forgot who she really was without a racket in her hand. Standing in stadiums filled with tens of thousands of cheering spectators, Steffi still felt an unusual loneliness. It was the loneliness of someone living according to a script already written, yet feeling disconnected from her own life. She became a master at concealing emptiness, making even those closest to her see only strength on the surface, while remaining unable to reach the deep wounds quietly speaking within her. As her career reached maturity, victory no longer represented conquest for Steffi Graf. It became a condition of survival. Every match became a gamble in which she knew she could not afford mistakes, because every defeat meant not merely the loss of a title, but a fracture in an entire system of belief built upon her father's expectations and the expectations of the world. Fear of failure followed her like a shadow, turning every shot into an effort to maintain recognition, because she secretly understood that if she lost the spotlight, nothing of herself would remain. The peak of this contradiction came after her historic Golden Slam in 1988. Having reached the absolute summit any tennis player could dream of, she found herself facing a vast emptiness instead of fulfillment. The question, what comes next, echoed constantly in her mind, yet it was a question without an answer because she had never truly chosen her own goals. Emptiness surrounded her amid thunderous applause, where the image of a flawless legend seen by the public bore little resemblance to the emotionally exhausted person within. The disconnect between Steffi Graf, the symbol of resilience, and the wounded person beneath had become immense. The outside world saw a woman who appeared cold and unemotional, but in reality it was emotional numbness caused by overwhelming pressure. She felt like an actress forced to perform the same demanding role repeatedly, where every gesture and expression on court had to conform to rigid expectations. She continued winning and lifting trophies, yet within her own mind she gradually became a stranger in her own life. This emptiness was the invisible cost of achieving extraordinary success too early and on too grand a scale. The years of greatest glory were also the years in which she felt most alone, because no one could truly understand that remaining permanently at the summit was a form of emotional hardship. Every honor the world bestowed upon her seemed only to thicken the protective shell she had built, pushing her further away from the genuine emotions of life. It was then that she realized true victory was not about trophies, but about escaping this relentless cycle before it completely consumed her. Steffi Graf's life resembled a tower built upon foundations of iron discipline and absolute control. Yet that tower began to shake violently during the 1990s as a result of upheavals she could never have anticipated. The first was the shocking attack on Monica Seles, her greatest rival, on court in 1993. Although Steffi had no involvement whatsoever in the attacker's actions, she became caught in a storm of ethical debate and intense media pressure. The public began scrutinizing her reaction and asking difficult questions, causing the silence she had always used to protect herself to be interpreted as evidence of coldness and indifference. Just when the aftershocks of the seller's attack had not yet faded, another crisis struck, far more devastating and far more personal. The financial scandal involving her father, Peter Graf. The man she had spent her entire childhood trying to please, the man who controlled every major decision and designed the entire framework of her life, was investigated and ultimately imprisoned for tax evasion. The image of the powerful father who had always stood behind her victories suddenly collapsed before the eyes of the world. For Steffi, this was not merely a financial case. It represented the complete breakdown of the belief system she had relied upon for decades. This collapse felt like a psychological earthquake, shaking the very foundation of how she understood herself. She suddenly realized that the man she had spent her life obeying and striving to satisfy was not the flawless figure she had once believed him to be. When the center of the system she depended on was torn apart, Steffi found herself profoundly lost. What she had always considered her duty now seemed meaningless, and victories on the court were no longer enough to repair the deep fractures within her spirit. Her faith in the values she had been taught began to crumble. She was forced to confront the harsh reality that she had devoted her entire life to building success for an empire founded on deeply flawed principles. Feeling betrayed by the very person who had guided her path pushed her into an intense existential crisis. She began looking at her racket, the tennis court, and even the fame she possessed through an entirely different lens. This moment became the final turning point, forcing Steffi to choose between continuing to live in a world that was slowly collapsing around her or stepping beyond it to reclaim the parts of herself that had been lost for so long. At a time when her spirit was adrift amid disappointment and doubt about everything she had once revered, Andre Agassi entered her life and completely altered its course. Andre did not approach her as an enthusiastic admirer or as a fellow professional focused solely on competition. He came to her as someone who truly understood. Having endured a childhood marked by strict parental control and the immense pressures of public scrutiny, Andre could see beyond the legendary image and recognize a Steffi who was exhausted and longing to be understood. For the first time in decades, Steffi was treated as an ordinary human being rather than as a winning machine. Andre did not expect perfection from her or demand that she remain at the summit forever. Instead, he embraced her vulnerabilities, fears, and emotional scars that she had hidden for so many years. Their unspoken understanding created a safe space where Steffi no longer needed to maintain the image of a legend in order to feel valued. For the first time, she learned how to open her heart, to acknowledge her weaknesses without guilt, and to stop fearing the judgment of the outside world. Their relationship became a healing force for the deep wounds she carried within. Through sharing her burdens with Andre, Steffi gradually realized that her worth existed independently of Grand Slam titles or world rankings. She began learning how to love herself and accept that she, too, had flaws and the right to feel exhausted. This marked the beginning of a new version of Steffi, one no longer defined by numbers on a scoreboard, but by personal freedom and an appreciation for life's simple, genuine emotions. This new chapter allowed her to remove the emotional armor she had worn for so many years. Andre's love gave her confidence that life held meaning far beyond tennis. Through the understanding of her partner, she rediscovered the ability to shape her own future. Steffi no longer felt alone in her journey of self-discovery because she now had someone beside her who understood the pain she had endured and was willing to help build a new life founded on sincerity and freedom. In 1999, Steffi Graf shocked the world by announcing her retirement while still performing at the highest level. To the media and her supporters, it seemed like an abrupt and puzzling ending. But for Steffi, it was the moment she finally laid down the heaviest burden of her life. Her decision was not driven by injury or declining ability. It was a conscious choice to step away from the path her father had set for her since early childhood. It was the moment she reclaimed control over her time, her energy, and her future. Her departure did not feel like the loss of unfinished glory. Instead, it brought an extraordinary sense of peace. For the first time in more than 30 years, Steffi no longer felt compelled to maintain a flawless image or satisfy the expectations of others. This relief came from accepting that she did not need to be a legend 24 hours a day. She began enjoying simple pleasures that had been denied to her throughout her youth, such as walking freely without photographers following her every move, or simply spending time listening to her own thoughts in silence, undisturbed by whistles, instructions, or the sound of tennis balls. In this new phase of life, Steffi devoted herself fully to building a happy family, embracing her roles as a wife and mother with genuine commitment. Unlike the father, who had focused solely on victory, she gave her children the freedom to enjoy their childhood and pursue their own interests, something she herself had never experienced. This freedom allowed her to become a more complete person, capable of appreciating and nurturing the small but meaningful aspects of life. Alongside her private life, Steffi also dedicated herself to charitable work, particularly initiatives supporting disadvantaged children. Rather than appearing as a symbol of sporting dominance, she chose to contribute quietly and meaningfully to her community. Supporting those facing hardship was not only an act of social responsibility, but also a way of healing the wounds she carried from her own past. Her life was no longer measured by trophies, it was defined by peace of mind and the positive impact she could make on others. Looking back on Steffi Graf's journey, we see far more than the portrait of a remarkable athlete. We see a woman who courageously carried out one of the most extraordinary psychological escapes of her lifetime. Her greatest victory today is not displayed in a cabinet filled with Grand Slam trophies, but in the profound reconciliation she has achieved with her past. She has learned to view the years shaped by her father's strict control with compassion rather than pain, refusing to let old scars or past expectations continue to define her. The freedom Steffi now possesses stands as powerful proof that even the greatest gold medals in the world mean little if a person loses themselves in the process. She has shown future generations a different definition of victory: the power of choice. True freedom is not the ability to dominate a tennis court. It is the ability to walk away from what does not belong to you, to preserve your identity, and to live a complete life on your own terms, even if it means leaving behind the most brilliant career imaginable. Steffi Graf's greatest triumph was not winning trophies, but choosing to live for herself. What about you? What is the one thing you would pursue in order to feel truly free? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe, so that together we can continue exploring the inspiring journeys of legendary figures who learned how to rise above themselves.